Hello. Let me just see if I've got all your comments coming in. Hold on. Can you guys hear me? All right. Just tinkering with the setup. Can you guys hear me all right? Is everybody there? Hello, yes, excellent work, excellent. I'm using a slightly different setup tonight. So last night I did the whole thing entirely off a phone. I'm still using a phone because, as I explained before, I'm still waiting for this last bit of kit, capture card, to be able to use my proper camera. But I think I've managed to get the proper mic working, so hopefully the audio's better. Yes, you can all hear me, that's brilliant and sounding good. I hope, I'm also running this through an OBS system on the laptop, which may mean something to some of you, but it just means that hopefully I get a clearer picture of what your comments are. And what I really want to try tonight, because that was the whole point of this, was making it more interactive. And I don't feel like I got through enough comments last night. There was a bit of feedback, so thank you for everybody who tuned in and who gave me some feedback both last night and today on it. I really appreciate it. Great to hear that the sound is better. So today I thought we'd do a similar thing, but I'm going to try and get more of your questions going. I have enabled slow chat, as many of you said to do, but what I think I'm going to do, because they're still whizzing by, is just put a slightly bigger delay on those chats. So just bear with me 1 second, and I'll see if I can work that out. Here we go. Hang on a second, guys. 1 sec. Bear with me. Slow chat. Here we go. Right, let's turn that on to 10 seconds. Save. Here we go. Right, you probably didn't tune in to see me doing this sort of stuff, did you? But here we go. Right, nearly there. It is 9 o'clock. Right, where are we all? I've been looking through all of the comments. Looks like many of you are all over the world, which I love. I mean, I love that about this channel anyway, but give us a quick shout out from where you're watching. I'd love to know. I've seen people from Brazil already. I saw somebody from Argentina last night, which is amazing. Lots of people from Australia, given the time of day that it is in Australia. Wow, fair play. Turn the mic down a little bit. Yeah, I can do that. 1 sec. Is it a bit noisy, a bit loud? It's probably me getting overexcited. How's that? Is that a bit better with the mic? Are we good for sound? Hopefully that's okay. Right, okay, here we go. Yeah, chat's slowing down a little bit. Can you guys see the chat okay? Denmark, Texas, LA, amazing. Cardiff in Wales, Portugal, goodness me, Mexico, North Carolina, Colorado, Yorkshire, big up the Yorkshire Massive, New Zealand, Leicester. Goodness me, this is amazing, isn't it? Sunny South Wales. Sunny in South Wales at this time of night. New York, Kansas. Goodness me. Well, listen, thank you all so much for joining. Toronto, big up the Toronto guys. My wife is from Toronto, spent her childhood there. So we got a connection to Canada, so big up the Canadians. Lots of people from the Netherlands as well. Thank you all so much for joining. I really appreciate it wherever you are, because I know the timing, we can't make the timing suit everybody. So 9 p.m. right now here in the UK. It must be all sorts of hours wherever you are. So I really appreciate it. Anyway, as I said in the description of this video, we're going to talk, I'd like to start at least by talking about customer cars in Formula One. It's been a talking point for a while. And the reason that it kind of really cropped back up on the radar was that there have been some comments recently about the subject which have brought it back into the headlines. Perhaps pre-season, this kind of bubbled up again due to the Force India, the Racing Point. Still calling it Force India. The Racing Point looking surprisingly like the old Mercedes. In fact, exactly like the old Mercedes, just a different colour. And that got people talking about, you know, what's behind that? You know, is that a good or bad thing? It's within the rules, because, you know, I'm sure you know they've designed it themselves. They've actually had inspections from the FIA, if you missed all that this week, and the FIA are very happy. I would have been totally amazed if they hadn't been happy, because no Formula One team would literally just copy the designs. They have to make their own designs. Now, yes, they will have absolutely looked at what that Mercedes was, with photos, with very clear analysis, and come up with a very similar solution. Obviously, that's what they've done, but they have done that work themselves, and that's what satisfies the regulations. Whether you think that's a fair way of doing things or not, it is within the regulations right now. So that's that one. That's the pink Mercedes. Yeah, you mean Aston Martin, Jim Picks. Yeah, well, they will be Aston Martin soon, won't they? Too many names, that team, in recent years. But anyway, one of the things that cropped up recently, just a couple of days ago, that I saw on the C-Stream app was that Christian Horner had waded into the argument, saying that as part of this whole cost-cutting thing, Andy Hines saying the mic's too low now. I'll turn it up a tiny bit, put it in between where it was. There we go. As part of the cost-cutting measures that we're having to look at much more seriously now, Christian Horner came along and said, look, we should just allow customer cars. We should allow the big teams to sell the car that they finish the season with to the smaller teams if that's the way they want to go. Because the smaller teams can save a load of money that way. It saves them a huge amount of production and design and development costs in that sense. And, of course, they're buying a car that presumably was at the front end of the grid just a few months ago when we get into the new season, which should make them a bit more competitive. Pretty much the way that Racing Point have gone this year. I mean, just look how competitive that car was. All right, it was the class-leading Mercedes, but look how competitive it was right in pre-season testing back in February. If we could do that with a few teams, the field's going to close up and we get a more competitive environment on the racetrack. Now, what I'm doing here quickly is giving you some pros and cons of this whole argument, and then, of course, I would love to know what you want to say about it, how you want this discussion to go on. And one thing to remember is, of course, Christian Horner, of course, has a big, healthy part in this argument, because as Red Bull, if one Red Bull team can effectively buy the previous year's Red Bull main car, of course, oh God, so many names in Formula One. I want to call them Toro Rosso. The AlphaTauri team no longer have to spend money on designing and developing their own. So from a Red Bull perspective, it makes perfect sense to take the old Red Bull and pass it on. It's a hand-me-down, isn't it, in that organisation? So that's that side. There are some positives to it. The negatives, of course, are that it perhaps goes against the DNA of Formula One. Formula One's about designing and manufacturing the best cars in the world and then developing them over a season, pitching them against each other to see who's best. And in doing so, we also bring through some of the best designers, the best engineers in the world. If we take that away from half the grid, there's much more limited scope to bring on those engineers. And actually, in the world of motorsport, there are very few categories left in the world where you can fully design and develop your own car. And that is a shame if that's the area of expertise that you want to get into. As a budding designer, if your opportunities are more and more limited, does the trade eventually start to die out, or at least become much more difficult to get into? So pros and cons to either. I'd love to know, of course, what you think. So let's get into some chat about that, and then I will reference why I called the video F1 customer cars for free. You may have seen this in the headlines already today, but we'll talk about that in a moment. What do you think, though, customer cars? In fact, I know what you think because I did a poll earlier on. Let me just see what the results of that poll are. Thank you very much if you took part in that. Just Kaz says, "Where's Pharrell?" Pharrell, my dog, is Pharrell, my dog, is in the other room, going crazy. The last thing you want is him in here, or the last thing I want is him here. I've got wires and stuff everywhere. The dogs will tear it to shreds. Let me just show you what the result of that poll was. I asked earlier on a very simple question on YouTube, and many of you took part in that. Thank you very much. Very simply, I asked, should the big teams in Formula One be allowed to supply year-old F1 cars to the smaller teams? With three possible answers: yes, no, or not sure. Overwhelmingly, most of you said yes. 51% said yes, 34% said no, and 15% weren't sure. So, given that that's what you're saying right now, that we should be able to do this, and now I've got to move my chat back, hold on. Let me hear your reasons why. Why do you think it's a good idea, or why do you think it's a bad idea? Steve Cole, 1984, not a fan of customer cars. Why is that, Steve? Let me know. We're all Bruce Segal. We're all here for the doggo. Lots of people say that on this channel. I have to say, sometimes wonder why it's become popular. Is it the dogs or is it Formula One stuff? It's okay, but if other teams are beaten by customer cars, it wouldn't be very good. Will Bennett. There's a good point. Would the manufacturer teams ever allow a customer team to really challenge them on the racetrack, to actually take them on over the course of a championship? The chances are they probably wouldn't, but actually the chances of that happening are probably quite slim, because the bigger teams will still have a car that's a year advanced. And unless they make an absolute hash of that, and even if they do, because they're the bigger teams, they're well resourced to be able to recover that situation, I don't think it's going to massively upset the order in that sense. Will it also be a year-old engine? Well, in the current set of regulations, it would. Now, somebody mentioned on that poll, in a comment under that poll earlier, and it was a really good point, what would happen when you come to a big regulation change, when the FIA or somebody steps in to make regulation changes to maybe slow the cars down for safety reasons, for example. So if you're going from a year where you've got incredibly fast cars and the next year there's this feeling we need to peg them back a little bit with regs, what happens then? What happens if we go to a different spec of tyre the following year that doesn't necessarily suit the cars from a year old? There are a huge number of challenges to making this work on a practical level. Totally with you on that. Customers can wind up being political pawns for the works team, says Christopher Allwood. Yeah, and that's the other big argument, isn't it? But of course, we already have that, don't we? Is that going to be any different to what we have now, where Ferrari and Mercedes control the engine supply of a large portion of the grid? They control effectively their voting rights in all of these big decisions, and there's a good argument to say they are already political pawns in that sense. So I'm not sure that we're going to get any more or less of that, because it already exists. Ryan Risinger says, it would split the field even more. The dominant teams with the cutting edge cars would be even more dominant. Well, that's a fair argument, isn't it? Although, if you take that Racing Point example, where they were very much middle of the field, perhaps struggling towards the back of the midfield at times, and yet what they've done is taken on board what is essentially last year's Mercedes, and look how far it catapulted them up the order, albeit just in pre-season testing. If we get racing again, I think you're going to see that car really mixing it, maybe even ahead of something like this year's Ferrari. So I'm not sure that it's necessarily just an argument that it would split the field to the old cars and the new cars. The challenge will be when there are regulation changes, and that's a big problem that they somehow have to find a way in the regulations of overcoming. How much do customer teams get now, Dean Arnold? If you're talking about components from the manufacturer teams, well, it varies, doesn't it? And actually, it's important to say this won't be the first time we've ever had this type of situation happening. At the moment, we've got teams buying entire rear ends from the manufacturer, so engine, gearbox, all the drivetrain, essentially. I think the first four, from memory, I think it was the first 3 or 4 Toro Rosso cars were actually the old Red Bull car from the year before. So we've definitely had this situation before. It's not unprecedented, but it's just something that teams are now, or people are now throwing into the argument about trying to find ways and opportunities for people to spend or to save money on all of this. It works in MotoGP. It makes the racing better. It's a positive. Simon Hill. Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more with that. I mean, hopefully you'll all agree with that, in that if the racing improves as a result of all this, then it's a winner, isn't it? Or are you on the side of the fence that says, no, it's not about that. It's not about creating a level playing field. And lots of you have said this to me in the past. This is a competition where we're trying to design and manufacture and develop the best cars on the grid. We shouldn't be trying to give everybody the same kind of equipment. There are two sides of the fence there. There's a fundamental issue here, isn't there? Should Formula One ever be doing this, or should anyone who wants to enter the pinnacle of our sport be geared up for, be funded, and be able to take part at the highest level? Question. Are teams just there to be in F1, or are they trying to win? Victor Aguilar. Yeah, I mean, of course, at the moment, there is more than half the grid that stand very little chance of ever winning a race, even in the most unlikely of circumstances. And that's a big problem, isn't it? Because we look back on the 60s and 70s and with rose-tinted glasses and say, wow, it was all amazing. The racing was great then. Just look at these clips that do the rounds on the internet. Of course, it wasn't always like that. You're always going to have big and small teams, and they naturally grow and they develop, and often it goes cyclic. So McLaren went through a spell of being very successful. Ferrari went through a spell. Renault went through a spell. And on it goes Williams, and then it tumbles around, and eventually this order keeps changing. But when we're in extended spells of one team dominating, or the top couple of teams dominating, it can be infuriating for fans. Stephen K says, "Hey Elvis, that story with Kimi and the gloves is bloody hilarious. I'm going to buy your book now." Thanks, Stephen, and thank you to everybody who's really enjoyed that Tales from the Treehouse series that I'm doing. I'm loving it as well because it's just a massive trip down memory lane for me. So brilliant stuff, and thanks to everyone who's bought the book. I mean, that really wasn't the intention of me doing it, but thank you so much for everybody who's told me you've bought it and enjoying it. It's great. Chris A says, "I'm confident that Tracing Point won't win races for very long with their Mercedes. Sorry, Tracing Point, because they won't understand it because they didn't design it." Right, that's an interesting point, isn't it? And this is another side to this argument. If you buy the kit from a manufacturer from last year, you won't have a fundamental understanding of how that car works. And there was an argument that I saw put forward by somebody, it might have even been Zac Brown, we'll get onto this in a moment, but who put forward the idea that if you sell them that car, if you're a manufacturer and you sell or give them or supply them with a year-old car, you should also give them all of the workings, all of the drawings, all of the file, essentially, on that car as well, and perhaps help them to understand that car so they can then spend some time and the money that they would have otherwise spent designing their own on developing that car even further. Those manufacturer teams will have been following a development path with that car before it came to the end of a season, and there might be some valuable information in that could then be passed on to the customer. I mean, as long as it doesn't end up with a situation where they end up being faster than the manufacturer. Kerry, all right, this is a quick one. Kerry Beale, how's the new book coming along? You might remember I did talk about, this is well over a year ago now, I said, look, I've signed a contract to write a second book, which I have. I started writing it, I started planning it, very slow, I have to say, but the concept for that book is talking about the 2021 regulations and how these cars will look in what was the 2021 regulations. We decided to put it on hold for a while because it would have been very difficult to write that book until we'd seen the 2021 cars. Well, now they've put it back to 2022, which means the book has probably got to be delayed as well. So there is another book coming. It's going to be slightly more technical than the last one, probably, with a few stories thrown in as well, but it's going to be delayed. I will let you know. Right. Let me see. And so Dean Arnold says, would the team supply and develop their aid program when they sell on the car? Interesting point. Engine manufacturers also embed engineers, but they're honestly doing their best to help the customer. Are they honestly doing their best to help the customer team, or still loyal to the hilt to the manufacturer? Lindy, that refers, I think, to a question I had recently in a video. You may have seen it, where we talked about the engine manufacturers embedding some of their personnel inside the Formula One teams and operating everything to do with the engine. Are they operating for that customer team, or are they operating for the manufacturer? They're working for the manufacturer because they own and they operate the engine. And of course, they want to do their best with that engine. Whatever car that's in, they're representing the engine. They want to get the best results for that engine. So I guess there'd be a question if the customer team started to seriously challenge the manufacturer. That's one we haven't properly seen yet, but would be interesting. Right, let's take another one on customer cars. Let me see. Formula One isn't a plug-and-play series. They should be the elite of the elite, including the construction of the car. So that's a good point. 020, Tom 020. That's a good point, and that's a valid argument as well. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, and lots of people have that opinion. And look, I've grown up with Formula One on the engineering side, and we always designed, we always created, we always developed our cars. It was one of the most exciting parts of, all the while I worked in Formula One, seeing the new developments coming through. The car was never the same one week to the next, because we were testing every week. We were developing at a far higher rate than we are today in terms of actual components. So look, I'm all for that. I'm all for the technical side. I don't want to see this technical and development side fall away, but we have to start thinking about Formula One perhaps slightly differently, as we touched on last night, given the current crisis, given the state that Formula One's in, the precarious state that the world's in, and we need to make sure that survival comes before anything else, probably. Do you agree? Right, I want to quickly talk about what Zac Brown said, because Zac Brown said today, let me just open the app, he talked about, now Zac Brown is not an advocate of customer cars, let me say that. So therefore McLaren is not an advocate of customer cars. They want to uphold their tradition of being a manufacturer, of owning and designing and developing the IP and the technology that goes into their cars. It's something they're very proud of. I think Williams to a certain extent feel the same way, or always have felt the same way. So I get his point of view. Right, so he's never said we should go with customer cars. But what he has chimed in on this argument that Christian Horner said last week about we need to start offering customer cars to smaller teams, and bear in mind what I said about how that really benefits Christian Horner and Red Bull. Zac Brown came along and said, let me see, hold on. Okay, he said, I would say that if Formula One went in that direction, because those customer cars, a year-old car, it kind of gets thrown away, then I'd be advocating that they should donate those cars if they really want to. They should give them for free. There is no cost to them. They've got all the stuff that they've done, the R&D, they have the spares, then they should give it to their customers and not charge them, if that's the way we go. It wouldn't be costing them money, and then if they really have the intention of saving money from a customer teams, well then just give them the car. Customer team, a huge sum of money. That's the first thing. That's a positive, I suppose, in the current climate. But what about the influence that you as a manufacturer then have? We talked about, somebody mentioned that earlier, the influence that you then have if you're offering this technology for free, along with development, along with spares and all of the assistance that goes with that. You then have this customer team, I mean, really in your pocket. And that becomes even more perhaps of a dangerous scenario that we have right now. Let's see, Just Kaz says, I'll have one. Niels Heldens, no. Rob Graham, high five, dude, from Toronto. High five, Rob. Big up the Toronto Massive. Let's see, no way. The knowledge behind the cars is worth too much, from some Puka. No free cars, but a fixed sum that's affordable, Squid Caps. Yeah, I think, personally, I kind of agree with you, Squid Caps. I don't think we should be giving them away free, but they should be at a very affordable rate. It's not that the manufacturer team desperately needs to make money off that as a revenue source, although it would be a revenue source. But it should be fixed, it should be affordable. Perhaps, should it be the same for every team? It works fine in MotoGP, Vincent Huang. Thank you. I don't know much about MotoGP, but a lot of people have said that they have this system and it works. So, you know, that's a positive. When we were talking about budget caps last night and everyone was saying, you know, it can never work. There are sports where these kind of things already work. There are some precedents. They might be slightly different. They might have different criteria to them, but there are things that we can work from. So it's not that you can't do any of this. All out from New York. What happens if the tub is damaged? Simon Hill. What then happens if the tub's damaged? So, well, you repair it. So you don't necessarily lose. Well, actually, that's a good point. It's a good question. Do you repair it? It depends, really, doesn't it? If let's say a new team that's working off a Haas type model comes in where they don't necessarily have huge manufacturing facilities like most of the teams have. Now, if Williams suddenly switched to a customer car model, they've already got huge facilities. They could carry out repairs, they could carry out developments on their own, make new aero packages, they could still do all of that stuff. If you're a Haas and you're coming in to the sport and you're trying to do this on a budget, and so this is attractive now to buy a customer car, it means you don't have to set up a big factory. What do you do then for repairs, major repairs and developments like that? So perhaps there has to be an argument where you can go back to your manufacturer for ongoing assistance. Perhaps you sign up to an agreement for assistance over the course of that year, whether it's spares or repairs and that kind of thing. Good point though. How much do you think they'd be if they sold them? I don't know, and that is an open-ended question. I have no idea, and that's something. It won't be what their value is. It won't be what they've put into them. It's got to be a nominal figure that somebody comes up with, hasn't it? I'd like all the budget. I'd like all the budget caps. I like all the budget caps. What I don't want is balance of power from Paulie Lewis. Well, that's another argument. As I say, lots of people saying we shouldn't even be talking about levelling the field. This is Formula One. You know, if you can't catch up, work harder. Generate some more income, some more funding so that you are able to mix it with the big boys. And I'm not going to argue with that point. There are two sides to this whole argument, fundamental sides. And a lot of people are split somewhere down the middle. McLaren CT, customer cars, just protects the elite while adding more teams to the midfield. Perhaps it does do that. Perhaps it does make the big teams stronger and more powerful. But if we're adding more teams to the midfield, maybe that's a good thing. The top three, as we are right now, are hugely powerful in the sport politically, but also in a sporting sense. What Racing Point have done, certainly going off testing, in the beginning of the season, looks like they might be just on the verge of breaking into that top three. Now, if we could have a few more teams just knocking on the door of that, is that a bad thing? Does that make it more competitive across the middle of the pack? And maybe even bring the rear of the field up towards them? It could be really interesting. What do you think about, this is slightly off topic, but what do you think about Eddie Jordan saying Lawrence Stroll will buy the Mercedes team from Craig Evans? Well, the first thing is that that's Eddie Jordan. Not that he's always been wrong. He has got a few things wrong, a few things right, hasn't he? Remember Lewis Hamilton moving to Mercedes. Will Lawrence Stroll buy Mercedes? I mean, he's put an awful lot of money into Aston Martin and into Racing Point, and I think at least his short to medium term plan, and he has a plan, he has a kind of 5-year plan with that, is to develop that team. They're building a new factory. It feels like he's pretty committed. Of course, what he hopes, and he's taken a giant step with that already, is that he can take that team up towards the front. Not sure whether he'd ever buy the Mercedes team or not, but who knows? He's on a mission to get his boy to the top, isn't he? How much of the performance comes from the chassis versus other ancillary items like brakes and suspension? From Doug Wiggett. How much performance comes from the chassis? Well, the chassis itself, this is one of these common misnomers, isn't it? The chassis is talked about in different ways. The chassis, as I know it, is the monocoque, the tub, the bit where the driver sits, the safety cell. That's what I call the chassis. The carbon fibre monocoque. And everything else, of course, is bolted to that. The engine's bolted to the back, the suspension's bolted on the front. So in that sense, that component that I'm referring to doesn't have a huge impact on performance. It has a torsional rigidity, stiffness, which does have an impact. So the way it transfers loads, the way it twists and handles the loading going through it. So that's really important in terms of performance. But actually the other elements like brakes and suspension, engine, aero package probably are much greater influence in terms of what they do for the car. Jack Milburn, we've gone off topic here, but that's absolutely fine. We've got a couple of minutes left. Jack Milburn says, did you have competitions with the other side of the garage in how fast you could build up the cars back in the day? Yeah, we did. It wasn't so much about getting the car built first, it was about getting out and getting back to the hotel more quickly than the other side. But yeah, it's a competitive environment. Everything we do is competitive, whether it's, getting your corner fastest on a pit stop, faster than the guys on the other side of the car, and there was huge pride in those moments, or getting your car built up quicker, or finding the perfect balance more quickly than the other side. These things all matter. We never talk about them, but they all matter. Okay, cream-filled banana. Great YouTube name. Is it possible for a kid from the States to get a job in F1, or should I be aiming for IndyCar or NASCAR? Don't let anything stop you aiming for whatever you want to go for. If your dream is to get to a Formula One, there's nothing, no border, no ocean between us should ever stop that. And that's the truth. I know lots of people from all over the world, in fact. The States, Canada, I know all sorts of people working in the Formula One pit lane. It's a multinational community, and they've travelled far and wide because their dream was always to get to Formula One. So Absolutely. There's nothing wrong with NASCAR or IndyCar if that's what you want to go to, but if your dream is Formula One, get yourself over it. Right, last couple of questions and then we will leave it for tonight. Sprue glue addict. Will F1 go fully electric? This is an ongoing topic, isn't it? My personal feeling is not in the short to medium term. I think that Formula One has a real tough challenge on their hands because the automotive world, certainly at the moment, looks like it's going fully electric. And all the manufacturers obviously are going fully electric with their core product. If Formula One continues to go down a combustion engine route, there's going to be a problem with the manufacturers remaining involved and finding Formula One attractive. So Formula One has to find a new way to keep people like that attracted to our sport, keep them investing in our sport. 2025 is the next big engine regulation changes as it stands, although that may get pushed back again given what's happened. And they are, as we've done videos on, they are talking about things like hydrogen, things like two-strokes. So hydrogen combustion technology could be something that's very attractive to the automotive sector, and that may be the route that F1 goes, and it could help drive that in an automotive direction as well. So loads of cars, loads of balls up in the air really in that sense. I can't see them going fully electric in the short term. There's always a possibility they could buy Formula E and merge with them. Personally though, I think that's gone too far down different paths at this point in time. Right, last one, and then we'll call it a day. Let's find... Hang on. Let me see. How long would a chassis last on average before failure without any crashes or accidents from Akia? Well, a long time, in all honesty. They don't deteriorate through use in normal use. So one chassis would easily do a season without any major incidents. You often get teams cycling through a couple of chassis in a season, but that's more as a precaution. Quite often it happens when a driver is not happy with his car and can't find a reason for it. Quite often when they've changed everything, they've changed the tyres, they've changed the wings and bodywork, the aero package, they've gone through the entire setup, the last thing left is to give them a new chassis and hope that that fixes it. Or even sometimes tell the driver, look, we found a problem with the chassis, that must be it, so we've given you a new one. And sometimes that's enough just to click in his head, get that, those demons gone and get him back racing again. That sort of stuff happens all the time. But a chassis, unless it has any major issues in terms of impacts, should probably last you a full season. Of course, the loads and twisting forces going through it do start to weaken it, but they're tested on a regular basis with non-destructive testing, and any faults that are found or any weaknesses, of course, will lead to an immediate change. But they will last for a long, long time. If you're referring to customer cars, though, would they go on? I presume that is why you've asked the question now, I've thought about it. Would they go on and last for a following season? Yeah, they probably would. And they can have any repairs, of course. There are ways to repair these chassis. They're not just done for forever. You can strengthen them. You can put repairs if they need them. But, of course, teams make more than they ever need or they ever use. And so there will be very low mileage or even sometimes zero mileage spares that could go on to the customer teams. Right, I think we better leave it there, guys, because it's 9:33. Thank you to everybody who's joined again tonight. Thanks to those who joined last night. And I read through all of your messages. They were lovely. Really appreciate them all. So whoever asked if I did get my beer with Mrs. P after the show last night, I absolutely did. It was lovely. And I might go and have another one now. So thanks ever so much, guys. I really appreciate it. I'm really enjoying this. So I hope you are too. It's really nice to be able to chat, live like this. Of course, I do this anyway, but I do it every day after my videos, and it's always me taking time to think about response. You've taken time to think about a question. Now we're doing it on the fly, and I'm really enjoying it. What's non-destructive testing? Sorry, I should have explained that. NDT, non-destructive testing, is there are a number of ways of doing it. A lot of them they use ultrasonic, so that's a way that you can look essentially like when you're looking like you can do when you're pregnant and they look inside your wife's tummy to have a look in see at the baby or the growth that's happening in there. Well, we can do a similar thing. with carbon fibre. We can use ultrasonic waves to look inside, look for defects, look for imperfections, and if we see them on the computer screen, then of course we know there's an issue in there and we can make repairs. There you go, there's a bonus question. I must stop there because I've got to go, but thanks very much folks, and I will see you all tomorrow. Peace, love, look after each other, stay healthy. Ta-da.